Dust. Dust and the smell of decay fill Gunnar's lungs as he tumbles headlong over the pile of bones in the dark room beyond. His torch splutters, and in the remaining light, a pair of greenish-white eyes stare back at him. The creature lashes out with tooth and claw, narrowly rending Gunnar as he scrambles to his feet. As he started combat prone, Gunnar has little time to do anything else. Jordahan, hearing the fight in the room beyond, and recognizing the danger that this narrow space possesses, casts a spell to dissolve the wall between her and Gunnar. The wall crumbles away, and the light from the previous room rushes into the den, illuminating the beast. The party beholds a Kino Viper, a creature with the body of a black-furred jackal and a long whip-like tail of a rattlesnake. Knowledgeable in the healing arts, Andrus casts a healing spell to invigorate Gunnar. Gunnar, now armed with his greatsword, takes broad swings at the creature to keep it at bay. Cornered, the creature has little choice but to release a hideous belch from within. A thick cloud of noxious vapor fills the den and adjacent zone. Jordahan, with a stroke of brilliance, retrieves a tome from within her pouch, darts into danger, and throws it open at the feet of the beast. A flash of purple light, and... That was a bird's eye view of a real encounter for my playtest game. I didn't show all the technical mumbo-jumbo that happened behind the scenes, but as we dive into the rules for this video, you'll see that intuitive mechanics lie just beneath the surface of the narrative of that entire sequence. Combat is by far the most streamlined part of Splice right now. I have a link to the rules PDFs down below, so if you want to follow along with this video, I suggest looking at the combat PDF, which will be more comprehensive than this video will be. Combat is divided into rounds, with each significant character taking turns after one another. To determine their initiative, players roll a d20 plus their dex stat. Once determined, that's that. You're not going to see initiative change much unless characters fall prone like Gunnar did. Characters fight on a battlefield divided into distinct, abstract areas of space called zones. Zones remove the need to measure distance from movement, weapons, or any other stuff that alternative RPGs might want you to keep track of. To keep gameplay streamlined, zones assume that characters automatically move or otherwise act within this space to perform whatever tasks you set out to do. Zones are also dynamic. They can be added or removed from the battlefield, something difficult to accomplish in rigid grid-based systems. Okay, great, but how do I actually whack stuff? Each round, players get 3 action points to spend on actions. Moving, attacking, casting spells, and defending are the basic actions that any character can take. Moving is pretty simple. You just spend 1 AP and move from your current zone to an adjacent one. You can attack anyone within your zone with melee or ranged weapons, and you can attack anyone in an adjacent zone with ranged weapons. Spells we'll cover in another video, and defending lets you add a +2 to someone's AC. A summary of all these actions, and anything you'd ever care about during combat, is visible on the combat sheet. You'll notice just below the basic actions are other, more complex ones that you may opt into for more tactical depth. All of these extra actions cost 2 AP, and most of them rely on some sort of contested check. Disarming allows you to, surprise, surprise, disarm an opponent. This does not just apply to weapons. Special items or other objects are fair game for disarming. A good rule of thumb for all actions in Splice is if a mechanic would support an improvised action, feel free to apply it to that action. Rearming allows you to equip thrown, disarmed, or alternative weapons. Restraining prevents enemies from taking actions until they can free themselves. Tripping applies prone to enemies. And now to my favorite 2 actions. I like polearms. Maneuver and stand ground. With maneuver, you may move an enemy and yourself into an adjacent zone. This also means you could move them off cliffs or into hazards. Stand ground is very similar to maneuver, but instead of moving enemies into a zone, you prevent them from moving into yours. Attack, disarm, restrain, trip, maneuver, and stand ground are all subjected to the consecutive action penalty. This rule says that for each time you repeat the same action on your turn, that action receives a -5 penalty to its dice rolls. You actually saw this rule in play at the start of the video. Gunnar's player had decided to attack the beast 3 times on his turn. This meant that his second attack had a -5 chance to hit the beast, and the third attack had a -10. Going forward and in future videos, you'll discover that actions can be reduced to 0 AP. And whenever any action's cost is reduced to 0, you can use that action once for free, and then its cost goes back to 1 for the remainder of your turn. It's important to note that the consecutive action penalty is still applied to actions used this way. Now on to the fun part about combat. Weapons. Proficiency doesn't scale with level in Splice. Instead, you spend XP and your proficiency gets as big as you want it to. Weapon damage scales with the user's proficiency in that weapon. Unlike other RPGs, there are no more arbitrary values assigned to weapons, and no more weapons that clearly outshine others. Weapons are instead designed to give different gameplay experiences. This is more heavily attributed to the fact that weapons in Splice have properties that interact with the combat mechanics we mentioned previously. There are over 20 weapon properties, so instead of going through them all, I'll highlight a couple of weapons that I find particularly cool.
Hook blades
are weapons that you can't use with other weapons, cheapen the AP costs of tripping and disarming, and confer bonuses to acrobatics checks that scale with your proficiency with the weapon.
Warhammers.
Real warhammers. The ones that look like claw hammers you can get at a Home Depot, not those meaty boys. Warhammers let you change their damage type, have an advantage of hitting in tight spaces as opposed to longer weapons, and are one of the few weapons that apply a stunning effect that solves the problem that XP to level 3 mentions in this video.
Glaives
are polearms, which are good for players who like taking the maneuver or stand ground actions. Like the hook blades, you also can't use them at the same time with other weapons, but it does apply double damage and a cleaving effect to nearby enemies.
Throwing axe
is short like the warhammer, but you can throw it, and it makes enemies easier to whack for the next person.
Nets and bolos
are weapons that make restraining and tripping cheaper to do respectively.
Shields
give an extra bonus to AC when taking the defend action.
Longbow and shortbow.
And the longbow and shortbow are ranged weapons that work well in defensive positions, but the longbow pew-pews further and the shortbow can be used on cavalry.
Unarmed combat.
Unarmed combat is cool because you can mix and match most traits and come out with an interesting martial style, but this flexibility does come at a hefty price. Keep an eye out for my next video as I'll explain some helpful GM stuff I use for combat, including how to design zone layouts, my own special minion rules, and a few other things. If you're new, also take a look down in the description. I do have a Discord server that you can join. I post updates there a little more frequently because editing takes forever, and it's easier to reach me if you have any questions.